Hello friends, and welcome to this third edition of the Linefeed magazine haul video review series thingy. I'm your host Michael Boykowski, and I'm trying to keep these videos to like around the half-hour mark, so I'm just going to whip through this first section, which is news. And news this time around is mainly going to be about a heap of events that are on. It's almost like there's a magazine, independent magazine / editorial design season, conference season or something at the moment. There's absolutely loads on. We've just had, like a couple of days ago, the QVED Editorial Design Conference in Munich, which was organised by the Typographic Society of Munich. And when I originally heard about it and looked it up, the speakers, it was just like a wall of like really serious looking men faces there, male faces, but it looks like it was actually quite a diverse event from all the tweets and Instagrams and stuff that I've been checking out, with some really amazing points, and really it just felt like there was sort of a really good vibe going on at that event. If you want to catch up with what was going on, look up the hashtag QVED and you can find stuff on Twitter and Instagram. Meanwhile, in Melbourne, we recently had a creative morning with off-screen editor Kai Brach. And he's like, he is the editor of Off-Screen magazine. He's really interesting because he's really open and honest about the whole process of setting up a print magazine, especially coming from a background that was mainly online or digital. So he's just a really interesting guy to hear talk about sort of all the troubles and traumas of putting together a print magazine and why it's worth it and why you do it. So if you want to catch up with what was happening at the Creative Mornings Melbourne event, you can look up the hashtag CMMELB. So CMMELB? That's probably it, isn't it? Now, things coming up that you might want to not miss if you can help it. In London, we've got the editorial design organisation has been a bit quiet of late, but they're ramping up again with a series of events, this time chaired by Sarah Douglas and Lee Belcher at Wallpaper magazine. And they've organised for Mike Mia to come and present in London on the 24th of March, which would just be amazing. One of my favourite studios. Would love to work for them. That's not a hint. It is. I'm moving on. It's not going to happen anyway. Never mind. We can dream. And weirdly enough, the regular printout event put together by Mag Culture and Stack, which is always excellent as well, is on the same night, and that's with looking at magazines called Delayed Gratification, The Outpost, and Poster. So I'm hoping that the two events can somehow talk to each other, and then people won't miss out on. We'll have to make the decision between those guys or Mike Mia. So either way, there's some great stuff on in London on the 24th of March. And then at the end, after that, towards the end of the month, we have Facing Pages 2014. Now, Linefeed, i.e. me, presented at Facing Pages 2012. And it was great. They sort of took over a sort of empty building in Arnhem in the Netherlands, and it was full of magazines and magazine events and magazine lovers, and it was a massive, massive geek out in a really good way. And apparently this time around, they've sort of spread it out around the town, so it sounds like it's going to just take over the whole city centre, which is super, super exciting. So if you want to find out about that, look up Facing Pages 2014. And that's it for the news. Next, reviews. This video was recorded on the very last day of February, and we've got 7 mags to get through. But I'm going to try not to waffle on too much, so hopefully it won't go on for too long. The last video was really long, I really apologise. This one's not so long. We're starting with Fuet. Fuet, am I saying that right? This is a Spanish magazine, although all the text is in English apart from there's a really nice bit at the back on sort of fleshy coloured paper that's all the Spanish text. I should warn you, if you see the beige bookmark, there's a disturbing image of a dead pig. But I'm saving you from the entire feature, which is about a vegetarian going home and watching his mum pretty much make chorizo out of pigs. It's quite gross. I wrote on Instagram that I was surprised to be excited about yet another independent food magazine. But Fuet is exciting. I think it's because there's something quite subversive about it. Like this issue in particular is about ritual, and you can see there's some beautiful sort of photography and illustration going on as well. But sort of like I don't know if the themes will like. How, it's the first issue, you can't tell. Oh, there's the pig, sorry, I should have warned you. Look away, look away. I'm not going to show you the rest of it. The actual design of the magazine is what I should talk about, I guess, because I usually talk about these things, is not surprising for an independent magazine. It's very much the centered text, and there's a nice serif and a nice sans serif. At one point I'll have a bit of a rant about how there's this sort of look that's being applied to independent magazines that's not particularly radical. It's starting to make them all look a bit samey, I think, which is dangerous in a way. But I think Fuet is different enough, and I love the coloured pages. Sort of every section has a colour, which really pulls you through the issue, which is really nice. And all in all, I really recommend it. I think it's a really interesting read. It's a little sort of confronting. I mean, they have an opening quote which sort of sets their thing, saying cooking is a fine example of the hypocrisy of culture, and they sort of run with that. So Fuet, really interesting. Oh, and there's recipes if you like that sort of thing. Next we're moving on to a magazine that's sort of a similar size, but luckily is a bit more radical with its layout, I think. It's the lovely, I say it's lovely because the fluorescent, everyone comments on the fluorescent red on the cover, it looks so good. I actually managed, I was tweaking my color settings just so I could get acid to look as fluorescent as possible in this video. I hope I've achieved that. But it's funny because I'm sitting in Australia, I'm reading Acid, and it's a magazine that's being produced in France and looks at surfing from a very European eye. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but just even the photography here, it's not, tropical sunny beaches and massive blue sort of oceans of colour. It's quite grey and sort of dour and cold looking in a lot of the photography, which again, sitting in Australia is a really interesting contrast. I had to show all these illustrations by Sally Thura. They're beautiful. She's one of my favourite illustrators at the moment, and I didn't know she'd worked on this issue, and I opened up and was like, oh my god, these are fantastic! Got quite excited. And so interesting for an article in a surfing magazine. It's about the sort of structures they put on the bottom of the ocean to encourage sort of ecosystems to build up around them. And they sort of cover an artist who's taken those objects and put them on plinths, and it's just, I think every Australian, I don't want to tar us with the same brush, but I think every Australian has tried surfing at one stage. And I kind of can, I know I've done the surfing thing, so it's just really interesting to see a magazine that's tackling issues that are around surfing, which is what a lot of independent magazines seek to do. And I guess maybe Wax looks lovely, but I just didn't feel like it had the editorial punch that I wanted. It was a bit more like how to look cool when you're not surfing and stuff like that. Whereas this is just about the sort of interesting, sort of really meaty periphery of surfing. Like what to do when, it's too cold. Or in a lot of cases in this magazine, it hasn't been too cold and people have just gone in anyway. There's a bunch of guys who cut themselves off from normal society to go find the perfect wave, and it's just a really rollicking good read, and wrapped in a really nice sort of radical looking package that has some of the conventions of sort of independent magazine design at the moment, but I feel is subversive enough, and some beautiful illustrations by Sally Thura. Ooh, a new Philosopher is an Australian magazine. Yeah, mate. Oh, did it again. Gotta not do that. Now, I don't know how old this is. I should have done some research. But if it's been around for a while, it hasn't looked this good for the whole time. It's only really in the last 3 or 4 or 5 issues that it started to just look really appealing. I guess that's down to art directors Carlos Egan and Ada Novoa, who I have not met. So there's no Pally whatever there. It's put together, the founding partners are pretty much a whole bunch of universities in Australia, so there's no advertising, which I guess helps if you're talking about philosophy, because then you can, you can just talk about ideas without having to have them straddled by any sort of commercial construct, or, have to sort of please people who aren't readers. Which is actually a really good point I just made, go me. That is the problem with a lot of commercial magazines. They're trying to please people that are not the readers. That's probably an obvious thing. It's not an epiphany, is it? I'll move on. The design, again, we're sort of sticking to this idea of like nice, polite, centered text and nice serifs and everything sort of looking neat and tidy and centered. Which, I guess is just the way things are at the moment. I'm from like the ID in the late 80s sort of Terry Jones school of design in a way, so I find it very staid, but it's a popular way to design stuff these days. It's very popular. I was trying to show you too, like, even though it's very heavy on text and very much focused on essays, they do have a really good opportunity to break out and present lots of sort of different types of imagery and artwork that you wouldn't see in other magazines. It's a unique sort of proposition, New Philosopher. Very interesting. Where are we going next? Oh, we're still in Australia, although it's hard to tell with Harper's Bazaar. I mean, I bought this issue and I sort of looked around at all the other international issues just to see what they look like. But I'll talk about that in a sec. Pretty much in Australia, we've had... Vogue has been around for quite a long time. Harper's Bazaar has been around for a few decades now. And we've just recently had an Australian version of Elle come out. And Australians being Australians, they've set up a sort of competition between these titles. So they're all sort of competing to have sort of stuff attached to the magazines to draw readers in. And Bazaar, for March, put out a couple of newspaper-sized supplements. And they're really good. They're almost better than the actual magazine. Aside from the fact the covers sort of follow the Acne paper sort of look, which is a bit cheeky. It's pretty much the same format and layout as Acne paper covers. But there's something about the size that's just freed up the art directors and designers to create a really classy, elegant looking magazine, because it's odd. We get all these titles in Australia that are versions of overseas magazines, but they're always slightly poor in some way. They never really hold up. I think like there's a thing over here where you don't want to be too serious about magazines. You don't want to be too serious about fashion. It's a nice thing to look at, but you don't want to sort of make it something you're really serious about. So there's always something slightly sort of wonky about fashion magazines in Australia. I wanted to point this out because this, pretty much when Corinne Rothfeld left Paris Vogue, it was very much like, oh, what are you going to do now? You've been editor of Paris Vogue. She was picked up by Bazaar to be like an international roaming editor or something, creative director, I'm not sure. And the fruits of that have started to emerge in these fashion shoots that then appear in all the different international editions. I'm guessing they're slightly different in different ways, but it's really interesting to see it sort of picked up and then placed within all these different international editions. This I wanted to show you just an example of when Australian fashion magazines just don't put enough effort into making them look good. I mean, it looks like a really ordinary fashion shoot actually, but there's something, they just haven't seen that the model's face looks just really deformed. It's like, come on, you know, somebody should have noticed that. You know, where's the you know, fashion matriarch slamming her fist down on the, you know, light table going, this is not good enough, they're not there. This shoot I thought was really good. I thought this was nice standard, but then it's all shot in Paris. It's not really Australian. When I was a lot younger, my first magazine I bought that I asked my mum to buy for me was Vogue Australia, and it used to be a really forthright publication that had a real definite look to it. And a lot of the Australian magazines have just lost that and sort of become this sort of internationalized mucky sort of spread, a sort of generic spread they just lather each issue with. But interesting, the different formats. The newspaper format I thought really worked. I thought that was quite good. We're moving on to what has been my favourite magazine in the past. There was an issue of Pin Up that I carried with me like all over the place to every job just as a reference, because I love the design so much. And I've always been amazed that Arial, a typeface I hate, has always looked so good in here, because it's the main typeface they use. I feel though that the last few issues have been getting a little stale. I don't know if I'm just putting too much expectation on design director Dylan Fraccaretta. I hope I said that, Dylan, right. I hope, maybe. Yeah, I don't know what's happening. I feel like it's sort of struggling to. I mean, it's really tricky because the design is really deliberately odd in a lot of ways. I use the word subversive, but it subverts a lot of what other architecture magazines do. In fact, magazines in general do. Sort of distorting type and doing things that people would in the past have said were ugly in a dismissive way, but elevating these things to an interesting status. And I just feel like they've sort of gone as far as they can in that direction, and I'm not seeing a lot of innovation in the last few issues. But again, I'm being hypercritical because I love this magazine so much. You know, these portraits are really interesting. I sort of did a double take. I keep looking at them actually. They're quite odd. Sort of like two images sort of assembled over the top of each other. And as much as I sort of pick it up and I'm like, oh, it's not as good as it used to be, there's still like loads to just be really excited about. I feel like I almost need to just forget I've ever seen an issue before and just buy it fresh. But then would I want to buy it? Yeah, I would. Look at that. That's great. That's really nice. Highlights of this issue. I'm not saying don't get this issue because it is a good issue. It's just not as good as, for me personally, it's not as good as past issues. This was lovely. This stuff by an artist. I'm flicking through. What was his name? Oliver Michaels. And he's just sort of condensed all these buildings into square shapes. There's a funny sort of, so I don't want to just classify it as 80s. But there's sort of an interest in marble and pastels and a bit of postmodern sort of flavour to pin-up. But I think pin-up's always been a bit like that. These are fantastic. These are computer renders of furniture by, don't make me say his name. Constant Critic? I actually did have to memorize how to say his name a few years ago, but I've just forgotten. This is like super subversive. It's like farms where you can shoot your own food and then have it prepared for you while you sit and watch other people shoot their own food and stuff like that. Really crazy, interesting stuff. And I'm really not hating these massive text sort of features. Like, that's quite a lovely double page spread, really. Maybe it's because this is the interiors issue. Maybe I'm not so into when they tackle interiors. And they were doing a thing where they were looking at objects. They started doing like a countdown, but I think I got halfway through and abandoned it. I should mention too, there's a book of all the interviews that have been conducted within Pinup as well that's available, and apparently it has no images, it's just all text. But I've heard really good things about it. I haven't seen a copy yet, but everything I've read about it, people are just like, this is great, what a great book. So have a look out for that. I think it's called, what is it called? Here we go. Not to know. It's just called Pinup Interviews. We've moved on to colours. Colours is great. The stickers are sticking to everything. I kind of wish I hadn't peeled the bit that wasn't sticker off. There's been a lot of excitement about Colours lately. Colours is a funny magazine. Like it comes and goes in terms of popularity and recognition. And I think at the moment it's sort of on an upswing. Probably thanks to art director Ramon Pez, who has been doing these really interesting covers that tend to be lots of little interesting elements sort of sprinkled across them. I'll show you, there's a page of covers at the end, I'll flash that up, but have a look for that. Colours, it's actually funny, I've met people who don't know what Colours is, and it's been around for a long time now. And I've had to try to explain what it is, and it's really hard. In a way, it's sort of doing a social service. I know it used to be attached to Benetton. I'm not sure whether that still sort of applies anymore. It's more actually attached to Fabrica, the organisation in Italy. But again, like, they have enough funding that they don't have to have advertising. I think when they first started, there was Benetton advertising in there, and that sort of paid for the magazine. But now they're sort of completely sponsored by Fabrica. I think Fabrica fund it. Don't quote me on that. I should look that up. So whatever funding they have, they're free to just do whatever they like, and they're not restricted by advertisers or anything like that. So in this issue, you can, like, there's items about sort of invigilators stealing things. There's a guy who makes all the marble work for famous artists and does portraits of Saddam Hussein. There's artwork that looks like penises. They sort of was, for me, they stretched the definition of artist quite far. Because they started talking about people who create prosthetics for people that are missing bits of their faces, which is a very typical Colours article, this sort of reportage type thing going on there. But I don't know whether it seemed a bit tentative tying it into sort of art world. It was almost like they needed a controversial subject. But you can see from these flicking through, the imagery is beautiful, the covers are beautiful. It's just everything's coming together for Colours at the moment. Design and editorial in synergy, which is what makes a successful magazine. Your probably main problem is just finding where to get it from. But you know, if you can find it, just have a flick. It's lovely. I think the next issue it's probably out already. That's the protest issue, so look out for that. Now this is our finale, grand finale. Foam is a magazine. Foam is a magazine, and also Foam is a photography gallery / organisation in Amsterdam. And they had an exhibition of William Klein's work. Now William Klein is a photographer who is like in his 90s or something now, and he's had this really amazing career where he was a photographer for Vogue at one stage. And then sort of ditched that and made this video about the life of a model and how crazy, and he just sort of subverted the whole idea that he'd been working for fashion magazines and done this really cheeky film. And he went on to then make like the most un-American, anti-American film I've ever seen, called Mr. Freedom, which is again funny because his first film was like this idolization of the lights in I think it was New York. So it's really interesting. He sort of had the big fashion job in New York, and then he's gone, no, actually I'm going to go and do this instead, and sort of fingers up to everyone. This is a good example actually of, this is a fashion shoot and then he's gone in afterwards and he sort of blanked all the faces out. So he sort of subverted his own commercial work. It's really interesting. And you'll see later on there's some pieces that he did. He's sort of gone back to his archive and he's re-shot a heap of images, but sort of left in the outtakes and sort of painted over the top of them. And he's just one of these really interesting restless souls who can't just settle on being a photographer alone, like has to like fit around. So getting back to the magazine, Foam don't usually dedicate an issue to an exhibition they have on. So this is really unusual, and they felt that William Klein was just someone who was so interesting and his work was so varied that they could do this special edition. Because I have to admit, I don't buy it as much as I would like to, because it is really expensive in Australia. It's like over 40 bucks. In the back of my mind I keep thinking, I'll just go to Amsterdam and I'll get a whole bunch of them when I'm there or something. Oh yeah, this showing you diversity. At one stage William Klein did all the covers for Domus magazine. So he's done so many amazing things. It's a sort of creative life that that anyone would be envious of in a way. And still at the very end they have a photo essay that he did very recently, which, although it's not as interesting as some of his earlier work, he's still out there photographing and creating essays and documenting stuff. As far as the design of Foam magazine, it's lovely to hold. It's beautiful paper. It's so well considered and so well designed. I can't gush about it enough. It's designed by a group called Van der Jong. How do you say J's in Dutch? It's not how you say J's in Australian, that's for sure. But they've been doing Foam magazine for a long time and sort of sticking with certain tropes, but I just feel like this is the synthesis of all they've been doing in this issue. It's really lovely. The magazine itself is divided into themes, and then they have a few interviews with Klein and information about him in between. You can see too that although the museum and the magazine focus on photography, they don't necessarily only feature photography. So in this section about Mr. Freedom, they had sort of sketches that William Klein had produced, which then became imagery within the film. So they're crossing over from illustration to film to cinema to photography in one fell swoop there. And I think that's what excites them. That's what excites me, the sort of cross-pollination of photography. It's so, like, if you looked at photography magazines, say, 20, 30 years ago, they were so dry. Yeah, and Foam is just, like, really joyous. It is really joyous. It's a really happy publication. It makes me feel happy reading it. And yeah, that's ending on some of his contacts work. And that is our reviews for this edition. Next, some news about news. We've done news. Some news about views. Something like that. Yeah. I really want to keep these videos to around the half-hour mark. So this section I'm actually going to put online from now on. So last couple of videos I've used this section to sort of talk about something interesting or bring up a topic. That topic will now go online, but I'll tell you about what I'll be writing about here, so you can get a bit of a preview, maybe. And the topic for this edition of the Mag Haul will be something that's been slightly bothering me lately, and it's this sort of perceived idea that some of the sort of people that talk about magazines and stuff a lot have about Australia being sort of like an ideal place for independent magazines in a lot of ways. And I'm going to try and dispel a few myths. So I'm myth busting. But if you want to find out about that article, visit us on Twitter at Linefeed. And the linefeed.me is the blog address that you whack in your browser. That's actually down at the moment. I'm sort of doing a bit of fiddling about, but I hope to get that resurrected real soon. But in the meantime, just check Linefeed on Twitter and you'll get updates and stuff like that. So that, my friends, is the end of another Linefeed magazine haul. Thanks for making it to this point. The next one will be along in a couple of months, so like end of April, beginning of May. Who knows what will be in that edition. I'd like to, at the end here, just recommend a couple of places you should visit. The first one is magpile.com, which I spoke about in previous videos. Really amazing community for magazine enthusiasts where you can buy and swap and sell and read and like and add to piles, and there's just loads to do. It's really awesome fun and just a really good thing to be a part of. That's magpile.com. And then Stack Magazines, which I think is stackmagazines.com, where you can subscribe and get sent like a vast array of international independent magazines, and it's a surprise every issue. I heard, this is a rumor, that I know they're really popular, but in Australia they have like 10 subscribers, so I think we need to at least double that number, please. Like, it's really worth it, really interesting stuff. If you want to do that, go to stackmagazines.com. For everything Linefeed, visit us on Twitter. The Twitter handle is Linefeed, and linefeed.me will be up again real soon. Thanks for stopping by, and keep yourselves nice and everything else. Bye!